The trade station hung in space like an old lantern, its lights flickering in patches. Rusted panels and uneven docks gave it a look of something forgotten, yet it was always full of life. Traders, smugglers, and wanderers came here to buy things that could not be found on proper worlds. It was a place where broken machines, lost relics, and even strange creatures could be sold to the highest bidder. Paul walked through the market with his hands in his pockets. He was not rich. His small cargo ship barely earned enough to keep its engines running. Still, he liked walking through the station. He liked seeing what others considered worthless, because sometimes hidden treasures could be found in piles of junk. His father had once told him that the smartest trader was the one who could see value where others only saw trash. That day, the auction hall was louder than usual. Paul stepped inside and found a crowd gathered around a metal stage. Lights hung above, throwing sharp beams over crates, cages, and broken parts. The auctioneer, a tall man with a long coat and a voice that cut through the noise, shouted the details of each item. Old drone chassis. Starting at 2 credits. Who will give me 2? Yes, 2 in the back. 3. 4. Sold. Items came and went quickly. Some were old weapons, stripped of power. Others were damaged parts of alien tech that no one knew how to repair. The crowd cheered or laughed as bids were made. Paul stood quietly near the back, watching with calm eyes. Then the auctioneer clapped his hands. Now here is something rare. Brought from the outer rim. A beast, if you can even call it that. The crowd leaned forward. A heavy cage was dragged onto the stage by 2 loaders. The cage groaned as if it barely held together. Inside, lying still on the floor, was a creature unlike any Paul had ever seen. Its body was long, covered in pale scales that looked white in the light. Its wings, folded tightly against its sides, were thin but wide. The strangest thing was the hard crust that covered much of its body. Barnacle-like growths clung to its skin, some cracked and some still whole, giving it the look of a statue dragged from the ocean floor. Dust and dried marks covered its tail. Its head rested low, showing one horn chipped and another broken. The crowd laughed. Looks dead already. More like a statue than a beast. Not even worth a meal. But Paul did not laugh. He stared at the creature, feeling something stir in him. Its chest moved faintly, slow and heavy. It was alive, though weak. Its eye, half closed, seemed to twitch when the auctioneer pulled the cover away. An albino dragon, or so they call it, the auctioneer shouted. Found drifting near a ruined moon. Covered in this strange crust, like barnacles. Who knows how long it has floated there? Some say it fought in the old wars. Some say it is only a deformed animal. Either way, it eats too much and does too little. Starting price, 5 credits. 5 credits for a piece of living history. Who will give me 5? The crowd burst into laughter. No one would pay even 1. It looks like a broken statue. Waste of a cage. The auctioneer frowned. 5 credits. Anyone? Silence followed. The creature gave a slow breath, as if the laughter hurt it more than chains. Paul felt a strange pull. He thought of his father's words again. Value hides where no one wants to look. Something deep in his chest told him this dragon was more than the crowd believed. Paul raised his hand. 5 credits. The room went quiet, then filled with jeers. Look at this fool. He throws money away. Wait until it eats his ship. The auctioneer banged his hand on the stand. Sold. 5 credits to the young man at the back. Paul stepped forward, paid the credits, and signed the record. The loaders rolled the cage toward him with grins on their faces. One whispered, "Better sell it for meat before it starves you." The other laughed. Paul ignored them. He looked at the dragon again. Its eye opened just a little, showing a faint red glow inside. For a moment, He thought it was studying him. The crust on its body seemed to hide scars underneath, old and deep. It was not just a strange creature. It was something ancient. As the cage was lowered near his ship, Paul felt both fear and excitement. He had no idea what he had just bought. To others it was a waste. To him it was a mystery. He whispered under his breath as he walked beside the cage. "Let's see what you really are." The dragon gave the faintest rumble, so soft that only Paul seemed to hear it. The auction was over, but his journey had just begun. Paul guided the cage into the cargo hold of his small ship. The door closed behind him with a heavy clang, shutting out the laughter from the auction hall. Alone in the dim light, the strange dragon seemed even larger. Its white scales shone faintly under the weak lamps, but the barnacle crust made it look more like a ruined statue than a living creature. Paul stood with his arms crossed, unsure what to do next. He had bought strange things before, but never a living beast. He expected fear, yet he felt only curiosity. Something inside told him he had not wasted his credits. He fetched a container of water and set it near the bars. The dragon did not move. Its chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, as if every breath was a heavy effort. Paul walked closer, keeping his steps careful. He spoke softly, though he knew the creature might not understand. "You are not junk. I saw your eye open. You are alive. Maybe you are waiting for someone to notice." The dragon stirred faintly. Its tail shifted just enough to scrape against the cage. Dust fell from the crust, scattering on the floor. Paul bent down to study the hardened growths. They were thick and layered, fused with the scales as if they had grown over centuries. He tapped one with the handle of a wrench. The sound was dull, like knocking on stone. He fetched a blade and carefully scraped at the edge of one. It cracked, breaking away in flakes. Underneath, pale scales gleamed, smoother than he expected. The crust had hidden the dragon's true skin. Paul worked slowly, breaking away more pieces. Each time he uncovered another patch, the dragon gave a low rumble. At first Paul thought it was anger, but soon he realized it was something else: relief. Hours passed. Sweat gathered on his forehead, and his arms ached, but Paul kept working. By the time he set the blade down, one side of the dragon's neck was free of the crust. The scales beneath caught the light, shimmering faintly with silver edges. The dragon lifted its head. Its single red eye opened fully, glowing brighter than before. Paul froze, his hands tight on the wrench at his side. The eye focused on him, sharp and clear. The dragon's mouth opened just enough to release a deep sound, not quite a roar, not quite a growl. It rolled through the cargo hold like thunder. Paul swallowed. "I am not here to harm you." The dragon stared at him for a long moment. Then it lowered its head again, resting it close to the bars. Paul stepped back, his heart racing. The creature was awake now. It was watching him. That night, Paul could not sleep. He sat in the pilot's chair, glancing at the cargo hold door again and again. His mind replayed the sound of the dragon's voice, that heavy rumble that seemed to shake the air. He remembered how its eye glowed with sharp intelligence. At dawn, he carried food into the hold. He had no idea what a dragon ate, so he brought a mixed dried meat, grains, and a container of water. He placed it near the cage. The dragon sniffed the air, then pushed itself upright. Its wings stretched slightly, sending flakes of dried crust to the floor. Paul held his breath as it lowered its head toward the food. It sniffed the meat, then swallowed it in a single bite. The grains it ignored, but the water it lapped up with slow care. When it finished, it looked at Paul again, as if to say the offering was accepted. Paul gave a small smile. "So you are awake at last. You are stronger than they think." The dragon's eye narrowed. Paul felt something stir in his head, a faint echo, like a voice not yet formed. He blinked and stepped back. For a moment, he wondered if he was imagining it. Then the dragon rumbled again, louder this time, and he knew it was trying to speak. Not with words he could hear, but with thoughts that brushed the edge of his mind. "You, human," the voice was broken, faint, but real. Paul's chest tightened. "You can speak." The dragon did not answer with sound. Instead, the feeling came again, stronger. Weak, long sleep, pain. Paul knelt down near the bars. "I will help you. I do not know who you are or where you came from, but I will help." The dragon's eye stayed locked on him. Then, slowly, it lowered its head again, resting against the cage. Paul reached out carefully, touching the newly freed scales. They were cold but alive, pulsing faintly with hidden energy. For the first time since the auction, Paul realized what he had truly bought. This was no broken beast, no useless relic. It was something old, something powerful, something with a history no one else understood. He whispered, "You are more than they think. And maybe, together, we can prove it." The dragon gave a soft rumble, as if agreeing. The sound carried through the hold, and Paul felt a strange bond forming. The creature was no longer just a prize from a forgotten auction. It was awake now. And it had chosen not to crush him, but to listen. The ship drifted quietly through the emptiness of space. Inside the cargo hold, Paul sat on a crate with his arms resting on his knees. Across from him, the albino dragon lay in the cage, its head lifted and its red eye glowing faintly in the dim light. The barnacle crust still covered most of its body, but the freed patches of scale shone like pale silver. Paul had grown used to the low rumbles the dragon made. Each sound carried meaning, though not in a language he could fully understand. Sometimes he felt words forming in his mind, like whispers carried through a storm. Other times it was only feelings: hunger, pain, or relief. This time, however, the dragon's voice pressed harder into his thoughts. "Name." "Rahl." Paul blinked. He straightened his back. "Rahl? That is your name?" The dragon's eye narrowed, and another whisper rolled into Paul's head. "Yes. Long ago." "Rahl." Paul repeated the name aloud. "Rahl." The dragon gave a rumble that sounded almost like approval. Encouraged, Paul leaned closer to the bars. "You are not just some beast, are you? You were something more." For a moment, the cargo hold felt heavier. Rahl shifted his wings, sending flakes of dried crust clattering to the floor. Then the voice came again, broken but stronger than before. "War, battle, 1,000 spheres." Paul frowned. "War of 1,000 spheres." The dragon's eye glowed brighter. The word pulsed through Paul's mind again. "Yes. War. Long ago." Paul had heard whispers of such a conflict in old spacer stories, tales spoken by traders who enjoyed filling their cups with rumors. But most dismissed them as myths. To hear it from the mouth of a living creature was different. He felt a chill run down his spine. "What was your part in it?" he asked softly. The dragon lifted his head higher. His chest expanded, and for a moment, the hum of power filled the air. "Weapon. Bonded. Masters rode the sky. I fought. Fire, light, death." Paul imagined Rahl not in chains, not covered in barnacles, but soaring through space with wings spread wide, unleashing power against enemy fleets. The image was hard to believe, yet the strength in Rahl's voice left little room for doubt. "And your masters?" Paul asked carefully. Silence followed. Then a growl shook the air, not aimed at Paul but at memory itself. "Betrayal. Masters gone. Abandoned. Alone." Paul clenched his fists. He thought of the long sleep, the barnacles covering Rahl's body like a tomb. He thought of the auction hall where people had laughed at him, mocking something they did not understand. "You were left to drift," Paul whispered. Forgotten. Rawls' head lowered again. Yes. Millennia. Dark. Cold. Alone. Paul pressed his hand against the bars. But not anymore. You are awake now. You are not alone. The dragon's red eye studied him. Another whisper touched Paul's mind, softer this time. You, different. Paul almost smiled. Different is not always bad. The dragon gave a slow rumble that seemed to echo like distant thunder. For the first time, Paul felt something more than pity or curiosity. He felt respect. This creature was not simply a relic. It was a survivor of a war greater than any human alive had seen. Hours passed as Paul asked questions and listened to the broken answers. He learned pieces of a story that stretched back farther than he could imagine. The war had been fought across countless worlds and star systems. Rahl and others like him were living weapons, bred to serve, yet capable of thought and choice. They had been used by a powerful race, a people who saw themselves as rulers of the stars. When the tide of war turned, those masters abandoned their creations to save themselves. Paul shook his head. You deserved better. Rahl's eye dimmed. All gone. Only me. Paul rose to his feet. Then you will not be forgotten again. If you stand with me, I will stand with you. The dragon tilted his head, as if considering the promise. After a long pause, he gave a rumble that felt almost like agreement. That night, Paul sat in the pilot's chair again. He stared out the viewport at the endless stars. His mind replayed everything Rahl had said. The war of 1,000 spheres. Living weapons. Betrayal. Millennia of silence. He realized something important. If word spread that he had awakened such a creature, others would come. Not everyone would see Rahl as a being worthy of respect. Some would see only a tool, a weapon to claim. The thought made Paul uneasy. Still, he looked back toward the cargo hold door with a quiet sense of resolve. Whatever dangers came, he would not sell Rahl, and he would not abandon him. They had found each other by chance, but perhaps it was more than chance. Paul whispered to himself, if he has a forgotten history, then maybe we can write a new one together. In the cargo hold, Rahl shifted in his cage. His eye glowed faintly, and a soft rumble filled the ship, carrying through the walls like a steady heartbeat. The past was heavy, but the future was beginning to wake. The small cargo ship floated on the edge of a quiet sector, far from the trade lanes. Paul sat in the cockpit, staring at the navigation screen. Rahl rested in the hold behind him, still weak but stronger each day. The barnacle crust slowly broke away under Paul's patient work, revealing more of the silver-white scales beneath. Life on the ship had taken on a rhythm. Paul would clean and feed Rahl, then spend hours listening to his broken words. Slowly, Paul was piecing together the fragments of Rahl's memories. Each story painted a larger picture of the ancient war, of battles fought among stars and worlds long forgotten. But peace never lasted in places like this. Word of unusual finds traveled faster than light. Someone at the auction had spoken, and someone else had listened. By the third day, Paul noticed a shadow on the scanner. A small vessel trailed far behind, keeping its distance. Paul narrowed his eyes. We have company. In the hold, Rahl shifted. His voice pressed into Paul's thoughts. Hunters. Paul tapped the console nervously. How do you know? The dragon gave a low growl that vibrated through the walls. Feel them. Old ways. They seek me. Paul's stomach tightened. If Rahl could sense them, then these were no ordinary traders. They knew what he carried. He adjusted the ship's course, cutting through a thin asteroid belt. The following vessel stayed close. Soon 2 more signals appeared on the scanner. By the time the stars cleared, 3 ships followed him. They are closing in, Paul muttered. He switched on the comm, and a sharp voice filled the cockpit. "Cargo ship, surrender your beast. Hand it over, and you may leave alive." Paul glanced at the hold door. "Not happening." The voice returned, colder this time. "You do not understand what you carry. That creature is a weapon. It belongs to us now." Paul's hands tightened on the controls. He had faced pirates before, but this was different. These men were not after credits. They were after Rahl. Before he could reply, a shudder ran through the ship. Rahl roared, and the sound was more than noise. The panels vibrated. The air itself seemed to pulse. Paul felt the hair on his arms rise. The dragon's voice struck through his mind like fire. "Not yours. Not theirs. Free." The scanners lit up with sudden energy. One of the chasing ships veered sharply, as if struck by an unseen force. Its shields flickered, and it fell behind, engines failing. The other two continued the chase, but Paul now understood what had happened. Rahl had done something. He had attacked without leaving the cage. Paul looked over his shoulder. "Was that you?" Rahl's eye glowed like burning coal. "Awakening." The word shook Paul more than he admitted. If Rahl was regaining his strength, then the enemies outside were in greater danger than they realized. The remaining two ships opened fire. Bolts of energy struck across Paul's hull. He swerved sharply, pushing his engines harder than ever before. The ship groaned, but he forced it through tight turns, weaving between scattered rocks and debris. "Hold together," he muttered. From the hold came another roar. This time the sound turned into a wave of power that rippled outward. The lights in the cockpit flickered. On the scanner, one of the attacking ships lost all systems at once, its engines going dark. It spun helplessly into the void. The last ship hesitated, then broke off pursuit. Its comm signal came again, filled with anger and fear. "This is not over. The Syndicate will come for you. You cannot hide that creature forever." Then the channel went dead. Paul let out a long breath and leaned back in the chair. His ship was still intact, but his heart pounded. He turned to the hold, walking quickly to the cage. Rahl stood taller now, wings flexing in the tight space. Crust fell in chunks to the floor. His scales shone like moonlight. "You saved us," Paul said. Rahl lowered his head. "We saved each other." Paul reached through the bars, resting his hand on the smooth scales. The bond between them felt stronger than ever. But the words of the fleeing ship echoed in his mind. The Syndicate. Whoever they were, they now knew Rahl lived. "More will come," Paul said. "Yes," Rahl replied. "They fear me. They want chains." Paul straightened. "Then we will not let them take you. If they want a fight, we give them one." The dragon's eye glowed brighter, and his chest rose with power. "Together." Paul smiled despite the danger. "Together." Outside, the stars stretched wide and endless. Ahead lay threats and battles he could not yet imagine. But he was no longer alone, and neither was Rahl. For the first time, Paul felt not like a traitor with a broken ship, but like a man standing at the beginning of something greater. The hunt had begun, and he was ready to face it. The ship drifted in a quiet region of space where no trade routes passed. Paul had chosen this hiding place carefully, hoping it would give them time to rest. The hull still showed scars from the chase, but the engines held steady. In the cargo hold, the albino dragon stood taller now, his body stronger and his scales brighter. The barnacle crust that once covered him had fallen away in large pieces, revealing a figure that looked both beautiful and terrifying. Rahl's wings stretched wide, brushing the walls of the hold. His eye glowed steadily, no longer faint but sharp like a burning star. Paul watched with both awe and respect. Each day the dragon recovered, and each day Paul felt their bond grow stronger. "You are changing fast," Paul said. The dragon's voice filled his thoughts. I remember. My body remembers. Strength returns. Paul nodded. And enemies will return too. That means we need to be ready. For a moment the ship was quiet. Then Rahl lowered his head, his breath rolling like hot air across Paul's face. You, weak. Small. But clever. You must learn. Paul frowned. Learn what? Bond. Control. Together. Paul tilted his head. He had heard pieces of this before when Rahl spoke of the old wars. The creatures had not simply fought alone. They had fought alongside chosen partners, warriors who merged thought and instinct with them in battle. The idea sounded impossible, yet something inside him stirred with curiosity. What do I need to do? Paul asked. Rahl gave a low rumble. Trust. Open your mind. No fear. Paul took a slow breath. He sat cross-legged on the floor just outside the cage. The dragon lowered his head until his glowing eye was level with Paul's. For a moment Paul felt nothing. Then a sudden rush of warmth flooded his mind. His heart raced, his hands trembled, but he did not pull away. Images flashed in his head. He saw stars bursting with fire, fleets clashing in vast skies, dragons soaring with light trailing from their wings. He felt the roar of battle, the rhythm of wings beating like drums of war. He saw through Rahl's eyes the speed of flight, the thrill of power, the fury of betrayal. Paul gasped and fell backward. His chest rose and fell in sharp breaths. That was too much. Rahl's voice pressed softly into his thoughts. First step. You saw. You felt. In time, you will guide. Paul shook his head slowly. Guide you? Yes, Rahl replied. Bond makes us one. You see through me. I move with you. Alone, I am strong. With Bond, stronger. Paul leaned against the wall, still catching his breath. I am no warrior. The dragon studied him for a long time before answering. Nor was the first of them. Bond made them more. Paul fell silent. The thought of being part of something greater both frightened and excited him. He remembered how the syndicate ship had fled when Rahl struck with unseen power. If he could truly bond with Rahl, maybe they had a chance against whatever enemies would come next. The days that followed turned into training. Each morning Paul sat with Rahl, opening his mind to the strange link between them. At first it was overwhelming. He felt the beating of wings that were not his own, the hunger for energy, the pull of instincts older than human history. But with patience he learned to stay calm inside the storm. By the fifth day, something changed. As Paul sat cross-legged, he felt a shift in balance. Rahl's breathing slowed, and Paul's matched it without thought. He lifted his hand, and Rahl's head tilted in perfect rhythm. For the first time, Paul did not feel like a passenger inside Rahl's mind. He felt like a partner. Rahl gave a rumble of approval. Better. You learn fast. Paul smiled faintly. Maybe I am not so weak after all. The dragon's eye glowed brighter. Not weak. Different. Training did not stop with thought alone. Paul also worked to repair his ship, guided by Rahl's memories of old war tactics. Together they practiced sharp maneuvers, with Paul at the controls and Rahl sending bursts of energy to the engines. At times the ship seemed to move faster than its own design allowed, as if the dragon's power bled into its systems. One evening, Paul tested a dive toward a drifting asteroid. At the last second, his instincts told him to pull up. He pulled hard, and Rahl roared in perfect sync, sending a wave of energy outward that shattered the rock behind them. Paul laughed breathlessly. That was incredible. Rahl's thought came with pride. Bond grows. Paul's joy faded as another thought returned to him. The syndicate. They had promised to come again. He looked at Rahl, standing tall in the hold, his scales glowing faintly in the ship's light. "They will not stop," Paul said quietly. "They want you. They will send more." Raal's wings spread, filling the space. His voice rolled through Paul's mind like thunder. "Let them come. I was betrayed once. I will not kneel again. With you, I will fight." Paul placed his hand on the bars. "Then we face them together." The dragon touched his head gently to the bars, sealing the promise. The bond of trust had begun, and with it, a new strength neither of them had known before. The silence of space shattered with alarms. Paul's hands flew over the controls, his heart pounding. The scanner glowed red with multiple contacts. The syndicate had found them, and this time, they were not sending just one ship. A small fleet emerged from the dark void, their weapons locked and ready. Paul's mind raced. "Raal, they're coming for us. Are you ready?" The dragon stirred, his wings spreading in the hold. His single red eye glowed brighter than ever. "I am ready. They will not take me." Paul swallowed and focused on the controls. "Then let's make them regret it." As the first ships closed in, Raal roared. The sound shook the ship, vibrating through every panel. It was more than a roar, it was a warning. The enemy hesitated, and Paul used the moment to maneuver the ship through a narrow asteroid field. The rocks shifted like walls, forcing the syndicate vessels to slow or risk collision. Raal leaned forward in his cage, claws scraping the floor. Energy pulsed along his scales, faint at first, then stronger. Paul felt it in his mind, a surge of power he could barely control. Together, they had practiced this, the bond linking their instincts. Now it was time to test it fully. "Trust me," Paul thought. Raal's gaze met his, and a rush of energy connected them. Paul guided the ship sharply, weaving through the rocks. At the same time, Raal released a pulse of energy from his mouth. It struck the nearest enemy ship, cracking its hull and sending it spinning into a small asteroid. The other syndicate vessels fired back, bolts slamming against Paul's shields. The ship rocked violently, and alarms screamed. Paul's hands gripped the controls tighter. He could feel Raal's presence in every movement, every turn. Together, they moved like one, the dragon anticipating, Paul steering, each action feeding the other. Another ship tried to flank them from the side. Paul twisted the ship at the last moment. Raal's wings extended, brushing against the hull, and another wave of energy erupted outward. The enemy vessel exploded in a shower of metal and fire. Paul breathed hard. That was amazing. Raal's rumble carried into his mind. "You are learning faster than I expected." The remaining ships regrouped, circling like predators. Paul knew they were skilled, but Raal's power had changed the balance. Still, he could not underestimate them. The syndicate wanted more than the dragon, they wanted revenge. "Paul," Raal whispered in thought, "we fight together now." No hesitation. Paul nodded. "Agreed." The final ship fired a concentrated beam. Paul dove toward an asteroid, narrowly avoiding it. At the same time, Raal unleashed a massive pulse of energy that shattered the beam midair and sent the enemy ship spiraling away. Sparks flew across Paul's control panel, but the ship held steady. "Keep moving," Paul shouted, though his voice barely mattered. He could feel Raal guiding him, a force pressing him to act with precision. They danced through the field, dodging attacks, striking with sudden bursts of energy, and using Raal's power to make the impossible possible. Minutes passed, though it felt longer. The syndicate ship, weakened and unprepared for the dragon's full strength, fired one final desperate volley. Raal's roar answered it, a wave of light and sound that engulfed the vessel. The enemy ship broke apart in silence, floating debris marking the end of the attack. Paul exhaled slowly. "It's over, for now." Raal lowered his head, wings folding slightly. They will return. Others will come. Paul touched the cage gently. Let them come. We are ready. Together. The dragon gave a soft rumble, almost like a smile. Together. For the first time, Paul understood the truth of Ral's words. They were not just a man and a beast. They were partners, a team bound by trust, thought, and power. Whatever the syndicate could throw at them in the future, they would face it as one. As the ship drifted back toward the quiet sector, Paul looked at Ral. We need to be ready for more than attacks. We need allies. People who will understand that you are more than a weapon. Ral's eye glowed thoughtfully. Then we find them. Those who see truth. Not fear. Paul nodded. The universe was wide and dangerous, but the bond they had created was stronger than any threat. The dragon had been forgotten for millennia, but now, with Paul at his side, he would rise again. Together, they could change the balance of power in the frontier. And as the stars stretched endlessly before them, Paul realized that the adventure was only beginning. The syndicate might return with more ships, more weapons, and more tricks, but he and Ral were ready to meet it. Not as hunter and hunted, but as two beings who had found each other in the emptiness of space. The war had come, but so had the bond that could turn the tide. The stars stretched endlessly ahead, but Paul's mind was focused on the approaching fleet. The syndicate had returned, larger and more determined than before. Their flagship loomed ahead, massive and dark, surrounded by smaller attack vessels. The warning had come too late. Paul gritted his teeth and glanced toward the hold. Ral stood tall, his wings flexing, scales shining in pale silver, red eye glowing with fierce intelligence. The barnacle crust that had once covered him was gone, revealing the full glory of a creature built for war and flight. Paul could feel his heartbeat in sync with the dragon's, the bond they had forged pulsing stronger than ever. They are here, Paul whispered. Ral's rumble rolled into his mind. Yes. We fight as one. No fear. Paul nodded. Let's show them what we are. The flagship fired first, launching massive energy beams. Paul twisted the ship sharply, dodging the deadly bolts. Ral's roar answered, sending a wave of energy that intercepted the beams midair. Sparks and flares lit the darkness of space as the first volley was deflected. Paul took a deep breath and focused. For months, he and Ral had trained together, learning to combine human instincts with the dragon's power. Every turn of the ship, every release of energy from Ral, was perfectly timed. Together they moved like a single being. The smaller attack vessels tried to flank them, but Ral's tail swept out from the cage, hitting two ships and sending them spinning into drifting asteroids. Paul guided the ship expertly, dodging the rest, while Ral unleashed pulses of light that tore through enemy shields. The flagship fired again, its main cannon charging a beam that could destroy any small ship in an instant. Paul's mind raced. He knew there was no way to dodge it completely. Then a thought passed between him and Ral, clear and sharp. Trust, the dragon said. Paul responded immediately. He pushed the ship downward, diving toward a nearby cluster of small moons. Ral's wings unfurled fully, the energy coursing along his body blending with the ship's systems. As they passed through the moons, Ral released a massive pulse. The energy surged outward like a tidal wave, striking the flagship directly. The beam fired by the enemy hit the wave and dispersed harmlessly into space. The flagship shuddered. Explosions erupted across its hull. Paul saw the enemy commanders panic through the comm system as smaller vessels began retreating. Do not stop! Paul shouted. Ral's roar echoed through the ship and their minds. Not until victory. They attacked in perfect rhythm. Paul guided the ship through precise maneuvers, dodging incoming fire while Ral released controlled bursts of energy at critical points on the flagship. Each strike disabled engines, shattered weapons, and destroyed shields. The enemy fleet could not recover. Finally, The flagship's core glowed red, signaling imminent failure. Paul dove the ship forward as Rahl released a final roar, sending a pulse that ruptured the hull. The flagship broke apart in silence, pieces drifting through the stars. The remaining Syndicate vessels scattered in all directions, some fleeing, others destroyed by the chaos of their own formation. Paul exhaled deeply. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving only awe. He turned toward the cargo hold. Rahl lowered his head, wings folding gracefully. The red eye softened, and the rumble in Paul's mind carried satisfaction. "You fought well," Paul said. Rahl's response was simple. "We fought together." Paul nodded. The bond they had created had carried them through impossible odds. The dragon had been a forgotten relic, abandoned for millennia, yet he had risen again not just as a weapon, but as a legend. News of their victory spread quickly across the frontier. Traders, smugglers, and settlers spoke of the human who had awakened a dragon from the ancient wars and turned it into an ally. Tales of Rahl's power and the bond between man and dragon became stories told in every port and station. Paul and Rahl did not seek fame. They traveled quietly, helping those who needed aid, freeing captives, and protecting small settlements from syndicate attacks. Every time danger approached, they fought together, and every time they triumphed, their legend grew. At night, when the stars were calm, Paul would sit near the hold and watch Rahl. The dragon often rested, his massive wings folded, his red eye glowing faintly like a distant sun. Paul would speak softly, telling him stories, sharing thoughts, and feeling the quiet strength of their bond. "You were abandoned once," Paul whispered. "But now, no one will forget you." Rahl's rumble responded like a soft heartbeat. "And I will not forget you." They had begun as trader and prize, human and forgotten war beast. Now they were partners, a team that could face any threat, change any battle, and stand as a symbol of hope. In the vast emptiness of space, they had found not only survival, but purpose. The stars stretched endlessly, bright and full of possibilities. Paul adjusted the ship's course toward the frontier, Rahl's wings brushing lightly against the hold. Together, they moved forward, stronger and wiser, ready for whatever challenges the universe would send next. A human and an ancient dragon, once lost to time, now legends among the stars.